Welcome to Modern Musings, conversations with the maiden, mother, and crone, where we look at ourselves and the world through the lens of the 21st century. Hi, and welcome to Modern Musings. I am your hostess, Cindy Murray, and I am here today with my co-host, Kristen Hessler and Amber Jones.
Hi.
Hello.
And if you were listening last week, you may have heard me announce that this week we would be talking about Gardner's 7 intelligences. And wow, I don't even know where to start with this. So I think we are experiencing the Mandela effect because I have long known of Gardner's 7 intelligences. And apparently lots of people have Googled that very same thing. But there are actually 8.
9.
Well, 8, and then they've added possibly 2 more. So, but officially it says there are 8. And I don't remember there being 8. I swear on my own life, I remember there being 7. So, I'm not going to explain the Mandela effect, but let's just say
that should be a topic for another time.
That should be a topic for another episode, but I will link to that on the Heard It on the podcast if you're curious, because it's a weird phenomenon, and we'll leave it at that. So, if you don't know about Gardner's multiple intelligences, which is how it's actually listed, it's a theory that we all have different strengths as far as our intelligence goes, and that some people call it forms of genius. So you might be a mathematical genius or a linguistic genius and so forth, and we'll talk about the different categories. But it's also kind of explains a learning style. And so the idea is that we all have different modalities of learning, and we all have different gifts as far as what we are good at. And the theory is that everyone fits somewhere in a category. And I really like this idea because there are people who are really good at math, and there are people who are really good at language and writing and words, everything in that vein. And they are 2 completely different kinds of intelligence. I know this for a fact because I see it every day in my 2 children. My son is definitely a mathematical person. He has always been a math person. From the time that he was 4 years old, he actually told me there are 9 zeros in a billion at the age of 4. Most kids can't count past 10 at the age of 4, or they couldn't back in the day. And then there's my daughter. She is a linguistic and a spatial person. She has always been able, she has a almost eidetic memory. I could ask her, where is my red shoe? And she could remember exactly where it was from the time that she was a toddler. And so she's always been able to remember the things that she saw. And so I think those are different. They're very different parts of the brain that make you good at those things. And I think that that's the source of Gardner's intelligences. And so would y'all like to start off with anything, or do we want to just kind of read off? Do y'all want to read off some of them?
The one that I like the most that is definitely not, it's not my intelligence whatsoever. I'm the most far removed from it, is body and kinesthetic
Yes.
intelligence.
And
And I find that really fascinating that it's recognized because it is.
as an intelligence,
It absolutely
it
is.
is.
Some
That
people are
you're
just
so
like,
aware
so
of your body.
and how it works and how it functions and how it feels and can respond to it.
Yes. And I think that's what makes those super athletes, the really,
Yes.
the really great quarterbacks, or the really fast runners, or yogis who can do amazing things,
Physical therapists,
Right.
even to me, like
oh, yeah.
massage therapists and chiropractors. To me, that also
physicians, any of those kind of things. So I really do think that there are these multiple intelligences. So before we go further,
Yeah, you want to read the list?
yeah, I will read the list, and then we can just kind of take it from there, and we can talk about what we are. As I said, there are currently 7 known, affirmed by Howard Gardner, intelligences: visual spatial, linguistic verbal, logical mathematical, body kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. So basically, in layman's terms, people who have spatial acuity or good with visual learning. Linguistic, verbal, those would be people who hear things, read things,
And speak lots of languages.
and speak languages, people who have a high vocabulary. Logical, mathematical, that one, doesn't need explaining. Body kinesthetic, that would be athletes or coaches or anyone who's really highly attuned to the human body. Musical. Interpersonal being working with other people, knowledge of other people, how to work with other people, how to communicate with other people.
Yes.
And then intrapersonal is people who are good at looking internally to themselves and understanding their own mental workings and how the mind works and stuff like that. And then naturalistic would be, farmers and botanists and people who are really good with plants and animals and the out of doors and things like that, the environment and things like that. So what do you guys think of this theory? Oh, and let me go back. So the 2 that are still debatable right now that they have proposed that are not officially on the list right now are existential and pedagogic. So existential has to deal with existence, basically. People who are spirituality and things like that, and things outside of the body,
And I would think that because I'm always normally scoring linguistic, I would think that I would be more existential,
possibly. Yeah.
over linguistic.
Right. And then and there are people who are heavily existential, because they're very concerned with the state of the world. So it kind of bleeds out of that interpersonal as well,
and intrapersonal.
and interpersonal, because you've heard of an existential crisis. That's someone who is
and that's always like one that I get high scores on also is
Yeah.
the interpersonal. So I feel like and I totally have an existential crisis all the time.
And then the pedagogic is concerned with education. So people who are good at teaching and educating others. And see, I think if there was a score for that one, you would probably be in that one as well, because that's what you do for a living, and apparently your kids love you. So
Right.
you
Some
must
people,
be good at it.
some people are good at leading
Right.
if they've got the material.
Right. Yes.
They can lead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it doesn't have to be formal education the way Amber does. It could be informally as well.
Yeah.
So, I really like these ideas that we're all sort of a genius, but just in our own way. Rather than treating the athlete like they're dumb, which they used to do, they had to help them pass school or whatever because all they could do was athletics. But, maybe that's where their genius is. Maybe they don't necessarily need that other intelligence to be the same because they are genius at their body. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not saying they don't need school, but just that we are all.
You can't be the best at all.
You can't be the best at everything. And sometimes, what they are the best at is something other than that rote learning, math or reading or whatever.
I think it's cool that you can have kind of fade into multiples. So when you're talking about body and kinesthetic intelligence, but then also be musical intelligence, I think about a dancer because a dancer can express
the music,
a feeling
through their body,
and maybe the interpersonal and intrapersonal also can come into play with that because you think about what is that freestyle of dancing? Interpretive dance.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they can hear music and convey emotions with their body.
Yes.
And to me, that's like taking those three intelligences and making something amazing with it.
Right.
And I think that's where you take that strength that you have, your intelligence, and create something out of it.
Right.
Beyond just this is what gets me by in life, but now you're above just surviving, you're creating.
Right. Well, and my husband, my late husband Mark, was a musician. He was also an educator, and he had a high science, mathematical, but he was also an artist, so he painted and things like that and drew. But people who write lyrics for music are very often also in that linguistic verbal because of the lyrics that they write. And I believe that there is this, I don't know, divide or whatever you want to call it between these different kinds of intelligences, because we all know of musicians who are just so ultra talented that it's beyond, you would equate them to an Einstein for music, and the same thing for athletes or doctors, doctors who come up with these incredible healing treatments or whatever that are just out of this world, but crazy smart, and it's not just that scientific mind that helps them come up with that. It's that understanding of the human body and, things like that. And like you were talking about with the dance is more than just a physical thing. It does take in that kinesiology aspect of it, but it also takes in that musical interpretive and that interpersonal, intrapersonal, expressing their own emotions to that music through the dance and things like that. Now, along with this idea, there is the concept that whatever your area of expertise or leanings or whatever, however you want to call it, that is also how you learn. And before we started recording, Kristen and I were talking about that visual spatial thing and about taking notes. Taking notes is a really great way for visual spatial learners to learn things, and
or linguistic learners too.
and in linguistics as well. And we were talking about color coding our notes and being able to, as you're taking a test, close your eyes and recall exactly what that note said because of the visual spatial cues that you made in your notes. So there's also, when they're talking about this, they're talking about different things that you can do to help you learn better by knowing what kind of learner you are or where your intelligence lies. Do you find that to be true, Amber? I mean, you're an educator. Do you see examples of Gardner's intelligences in your classroom, and do you adapt your teaching in any way to accommodate those different kinds of learning? I know that's a heavy question there. Yeah.
Put me on the spot. Yes, I definitely see the different ways that a child learns. And usually at the beginning of the school year, when I get a new crop of students, I test them, so to speak, to see which ones learn which ways. I usually do a series of assignments at the beginning of the year that kind of test like what kind of intelligence is, like what would be my best way to teach the classes that I teach, because some classes learn very differently. Students learn very differently. Definitely, like say if a student is of musical intelligence, and I teach at a liberal arts school, so there are a lot of students with musical interest, musical intelligence, then you would want to, they would be more interested in an English lesson about a singer or a composer or poetry even.
Right.
They would be more interested in writing their own lyrics or rhyming or doing research on different types of music, and they really enjoy like the poetry part of the year. Whereas kinesthetic learners, they have a hard time sitting still. They want to be up and moving around the room. So a lesson that gets the students out of their chairs, moving around, writing on the board, doing a gallery walk, those would be better lessons for the kinesthetic learners because they have a hard time staying in one place.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if you're thinking like of teaching someone to remember a series of information, like a story or a poem, having them like, bodily intelligence, having them like do like hand symbols or something while they're reciting.
Right.
Because then when you come to take the test, all you got to do is like kind of do the little hand symbols and and then you're like, oh, I know that information. For someone who's like more musically inclined, make a song out of it. Like, boom, you will remember.
Yes. Well, there are a lot of like mnemonic songs.
Exactly.
That,
the mnemonic devices
kids can use to learn different information. And then, of course, there are the students like the linguistic students or the visual spatial students that can't learn anything unless they write it down. And then there are the students that have to repeat it out loud. They can't learn anything unless they repeat it out loud.
Or there's people like me.
Or read it out loud.
I think that's one of my, because one of mine is spatial. I remember stuff like when I see it. Like, give me a documentary. And I will watch that documentary, and then I can tell you everything I learned from that documentary. But have me read a book, I won't remember it unless I write the notes out.
Because you have that visual spatial
turn
thing.
it into
right.
Yeah. So that's also kind of one of those things where like people learn better when they actually do something versus seeing someone else do it.
Yeah, I learn better by doing, definitely. If I watch somebody do something, I mean, it's good learning to watch it, but I have to be, it's like whenever I learn a new game, I have to play it. You can read out.
Yep, it makes absolutely no sense if you just read.
Yeah, you can
the
read
directions
out
to me.
directions.
I'm like, I'll learn how to
like,
play
whatever.
while we play.
Yeah. If somebody tells me the directions, it's gone. But if I can look at it and read it, because I am a visual spatial learner, but I'm also a linguistics, but I can't listen to it audibly. I have to see it in writing. Yeah.
I only half listen to somebody when they tell me directions.
I can't even listen to audiobooks because I tune out in the middle of them. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it has to be physically done for me, and I have to physically like be there and do it to learn.
That's funny. You said that you tune out whenever you listen to audiobooks. I see like it's all an enactment in my head when I listen to an audiobook. It's like a movie in my brain.
It depends on the audiobook. Like if there's like high action audiobook, then I'm there. I'm in it. I'm listening
fiction,
to the story.
I don't know about nonfiction so much though.
Yeah. If it's not interesting, like if I can't visualize cool stuff happening, then I probably won't listen to
cool
it.
stuff happening. I know. I was literally thinking
I don't want to
about,
ask what the cool stuff
I was like,
happening
if
is.
the recording,
I know the stuff y'all read.
If the audio book was about chemistry and like at the atomic level, I would not be able to visualize it. I would lose it. You know,
Yeah, there are certain
because I can't
that you
see
have
that
because
read.
you haven't seen it. It has to be something you've
you
already
have to
seen.
read
do
it.
not believe it unless I can see it. And I think that was probably one of the hardest things in science was like a lot of the stuff that they taught us was stuff you can't actually like see
Right.
for your own eyys. Like,
Okay.
I don't know.
I
if
get that.
makes sense. Like the nature part
Yeah.
makes sense because I can see it
Yeah.
everywhere
You
around
can walk
me.
out and see
And
a mushroom growing on the ground.
yes,
or a
and
fungus
whenever
of
I
some
took
sort.
anatomy, I could
You can see
see
the
it.
body parts,
But when
yeah.
we got to cellular level, no.
Yeah.
DNA, no.
Microorganisms, stuff like that, because you can't like physically.
Chemistry.
Mm-hmm. The invisible stuff, yeah. All the stuff that Stephen talks about with his physics.
Theoretical physics, yeah.
Theoretical physics.
Yeah, because
My brain
there is
wants
no-
to
yeah.
understand it because that literally is spatial stuff.
yeah.
And
There's
I
a
try
lot
so
of
hard to understand
dumb
it. But
math involved in that too.
There is a ton
she said
of
dumb
math.
math.
Yeah, a lot of dumb math.
It's not
That's
dumb
what
math. That's smart math.
I know it's smart math, but to me it's dumb.
So smart
I-
it doesn't even, it's invisible.
Yeah, it's so smart it's dumb. Like my dad would totally have been into, anything, but I just that was my least favorite class was physics because of all of the
See,
math.
I loved physics, but and I'm really
I
surprised
loved
when I took
chemistry, and there was math in that too. So
Yeah.
I don't
That's
know.
all
Yeah.
chemistry was
Is
math.
math, yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, I like the chemistry math. I like the elements and that kind of math. I don't like the physics math. That's my least favorite part of astronomy is the actual physics mapping the stars.
That's so funny. My favorite math was geometry. Like,
Oh,
and literally I was
yeah.
just talking about
That's
that.
a spatial thing, though.
Raina was doing
That is a spatial
her
thing.
homework. Yeah. And I enjoyed that. Like, I actually, like, wanted to sit down and help her with her homework. It was the circumference and stuff. And that one is probably my least favorite was circles.
Right.
I like triangles and, the other stuff. But
Now that was actually I did
Yeah.
like that kind of
'Cause-
stuff.
See, I
in
never had
geometry. Like,
geometry.
I
I
liked the-
did algebra 1 and 2. So, and back when I went to school, you
they
only
didn't
had to have
teach
2.
you about shapes in school.
No, no, there was a track. You either did geometry or you did algebra,
Oh,
and
man,
I did algebra.
Totally would have taken
So,
geometry instead.
Yeah,
But it's literally algebra too.
you didn't
it
have
like
4
a-
years of math when I was
It's-
in school.
yeah.
Now, nowadays you have to have like
4x4,
both algebras, geometry,
and then like trig or calculus or something.
calculus. And I'm so glad that they didn't
Me
have
too.
calculus when I was in school.
Me too.
Well, I mean, they had it for math nerds, but I was not a math nerd,
Well,
so
they
there's
had
no way I was taking
okay.
calculus.
My little school. We've talked about this before because my little school was truly a little school. It was so small. There were 33 students in my graduating class. So the year that I was taking algebra 2, there were actually 3 students taking trigonometry in the same class with me because they couldn't make
so
another class
stupid.
just for those 3 people.
Yeah.
And I have mentioned multiple times how I felt very shortchanged by that, because I felt like the teacher spent all her time with her trig students huddled around her desk working on things, and I was drowning in math.
Quadratic
Yeah.
formula.
It was quadratic equations and
Yep.
parabolas.
You spend
parabolas.
the whole algebra 2 on quadratic formula.
Yes, and I was just drowning in them and didn't understand them. And I took it again. I actually failed the class because I couldn't grasp it, and I felt like I wasn't being taught. And so I took it again and I made a B. So I obviously got something out of it. And when I went to I went to college later, and I had to take college algebra, and I got a B again. So I don't think it was me. I think it was the teacher. And
Maybe.
I really don't blame her, because she was in an untenable position. How can you teach
Two
two different
math
classes
at
at the same time? You cannot do that. That was stupid.
That is education today.
Oh, it is. It is. And particularly at a rural school. And like I say,
Amber's
I
like,
don't
I have a
think
class
I was
just like
I
that.
don't think I was bad at math. I think I was just poorly educated in math. And I was really kind of surprised that my math score on the 7 intelligences was not, it was my second lowest area, but I feel like it probably, it was just the way the questions were worded that I
Yeah.
had to score myself lower on it. But I think it was an educational thing, not a knowledge or a comfort, because I don't feel comfortable doing hard math, but I actually do math every day, all the time, and I think I'm pretty good at it. So I think in that logic and math area, I'm a lot better than I used to think that I was. I used to think I was really dumb at math, and because of failing that math class.
Yeah.
But I really think that I was just not properly educated.
Probably you could use your intelligence where you are intelligent and use those to teach yourself
Right.
Yeah.
more.
Well, I mean,
And-
like I
yeah.
say, I use Excel every day. One of the questions we actually all took a quiz on this before we recorded, so that we would kind of have some things to talk about.
Yeah.
And one of the questions was, do you how was it worded? Do you regularly or every day do you see relationships and the world around you?
Ratios or something like that.
Yeah, there was 2 different ones that did that. Do you see things in ratios, and do you regularly make up equations to explain relationships between things in your life? And I was like, oh my God, I do this every day in Excel.
Yeah.
I do it in Excel. I don't have to do the math,
I do it a lot.
but I write those equations. I have written huge spreadsheets to track my clients, my travel agency clients. When I do a group cruise, I've got to track, 30 or more people sometimes. And I need to track all the money that they pay and what kind of cabin they're in, and, what dining they want, and whether they bought travel protection, and whether they bought the drink package or the prepaid their gratuities. And, every cabin is at a different price, and I got to figure out the commission, and I have this really extensive spreadsheet that is like all of this math. It's exactly that question. And I loved doing it. I make spreadsheets all the time for everything. And, just to control, here's a list of things. Let me do this and tell it to calculate how often I need to do this by the date, and, and things like that. And so I really feel like I should have scored higher on that one, but because I am so uncomfortable with my education in math, a lot of the other questions I had to answer less confidently.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to go back though, my scores actually placed me. The top score is a 5, and I landed with a 4 in musical, which is not a surprise because I was a musician. I've played clarinet, guitar, several different instruments. I went to school as an audio engineer and married to a musician and an audio engineer. And I've been in many, 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 many bands and performed on stage and things like that. So that one was written music and everything. So that one was not a surprise. And then I also had the, language, the linguistic one. And that is not a surprise because I'm a writer. I talk. I have a pretty big vocabulary. I journal, and I tell stories. I scrapbook and tell stories through my scrapbooks. And the journaling part of that is probably one of my favorite parts, to take a single picture and tell the story behind the picture, and writing on the blog as well. And then my third one was visual spatial. And that one was not surprising to me either because I'm an artist. I do art. I paint, draw, collage, scrapbook, all kinds of things. And I'm a visual learner. So like I was talking earlier about color coding my notes for tests and things like that. I take extensive notes when I'm learning something or doing a webinar or whatever, and that's how I remember things. So those things were not surprising to me at all. So and all three of those were in the higher range, with the music being number 4. Now, Kristen, you had some slightly different ones, right?
Mine was actually surprising because I got my highest score was linguistic, and I guess I always think of linguistic as like written word, maybe because I'm spatial and I see it,
right?
But I didn't really think about it until I
Being
started
verbal
talking about it, and then I was like, oh man, I'm so verbal. I mean, I don't have any trouble talking, obviously.
Right. Well, I mean, that's why we're here, right?
I know, right?
We are.
And actually in my role, I work in a call center and I supervise, and one of the biggest functions in my role is critique. And so I listen to calls all day long. I'm listening to calls and then giving feedback on different approaches or verbiage used, and really using linguistic approach for enhancing our business.
Right.
So I was like, oh, well, duh. That's literally my career. So I guess I'm in the right place in my job. And then I also do a lot of training and stuff where I'm actually speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I also have written a training manual for my job, and lots of PowerPoints and scripts. I've written scripts that we use throughout the company to talk on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So not just in our call center, but company wide. So it's kind of cool. Thinking about it, I was like, wow, okay, I guess maybe I am kind of good at my job. Maybe, maybe I am in the right place. But I was actually really surprised that was my highest score. And then my second one and third one, I was tied with the spatial intelligence, which I knew that one was going to be one of them because I remember taking an IQ test when I was in high school. And I believe I took one when I was really young because I remember things
when you were
touching
4.
things. Yeah. I remember that. Literally, that's funny because that's what I remember is the things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I can remember that from being 4. And I remembered the spatial intelligence because I scored really high on that part of my IQ test with the shapes and doing the puzzles and problem solving in that sense. So I was like, oh yeah, I got that one pretty sure. And And then also with, being an artist as well, that didn't surprise me. The one that also surprised me, though, was naturalist. And the questions on that one kept making me think of, like, people hiking and, like, doing stuff outdoors, like camping and stuff, which I do love to do. But I'm not like, yay, let's go outside, but I do like the outdoors. And I do like things like geology and natural science, animals. I'm very connected with animals. And so I thought that was pretty cool. Like, I can kill plants pretty easily, but I was saying, like, oh yeah, that's interesting.
We talked
because
about that a couple of weeks ago.
I'm terrible with plants, but I don't give up. Like, I'm still drawn to cultivating plants. Like,
right.
I turn around and it dies, and then I'm like, let me go get another one and let me do the research. And I love like watching gardening, like tip videos and stuff. So I'm like, apparently it's something that is innate within me, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
drawn to it. Yeah.
I'm drawn to it. I just still learning how to learn. I guess.
Yeah.
So I thought that one was really interesting. Oh, by the way,
I would like to know the learning tips that were on.
So the learning tips actually were less like the linguistic and the spatial one were basically saying, like, here's how you can improve or use this intelligence for other things, like have a journal, read out loud, those kind of things, or use a tape recorder.
What was the one for the naturalist, though? I'm really curious about that.
The naturalist one said work in the garden, read about plants or animals.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Study habits of fish or birds. Read nature magazines.
So that's trying to encourage nature learners. That's giving them ideas of things that
how to be more connected with that intelligence. Yeah.
Right. How to if you're trying to increase their reading ability, have them read things about nature.
Of things that they're interested in.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know if there were any special things because, like, on the music one, some of the things were having students work with words that sound like what they mean, which is, I'm going to try to say this, onomatopoeia.
Onomatopoeia.
Yes. I can't say it. And then using music as a background while viewing and helping to remember, using things like that, clap out or walk out the sounds of syllables, and choral reading, to help music learners. So I thought that was, or using rhymes to remember spelling rules, like I before E except after C, and things like that. So those things help music learners learn. So I thought that was kind of interesting, different approach to teaching.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're interested in taking the little quiz that we took, it was really short. It was only like 50-something questions, and it was all on one page, so you didn't have to, like, keep refreshing. I took it on my phone. It's literacynet.org. So we'll link that on the, heard it on the podcast. So were you surprised with your results, Amber?
No. I mean, my top result was linguistic. Verbal, and my job all day is communicating all the time, talking all the time and communicating.
You're an English teacher.
Yeah, I'm an English teacher. Yeah, so definitely. And then my second one was interpersonal, which is
that also makes
same
sense.
Thing.
Yeah, you're working with students.
Yeah, working with students, and I'm in college to become a counselor, so I'm counseling all the time, one of the many hats that I wear at work. So, yeah, and then, okay, so my third one, though, did surprise me.
Yeah?
Well, okay, it did, but it didn't. It was music.
Oh.
And I play an instrument.
You love music.
I do love music, and I do play instruments. Yeah. So
you just kind of haven't done instrument
in a long time. When you read the information about the music intelligence, it doesn't necessarily always interpret to musician. It
Yeah.
could just be someone who has such a passion for music or who can relate to music in such a way, because like dancer falls into that category as well.
Yeah.
So, I thought that was really interesting that you don't have to necessarily be a musician to fall into the music
intelligence.
Yeah.
And then my fourth one was kind of like Kristen, naturalistic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I know.
Yeah, mine was the fourth one also.
I'm always talking about killing plants
And I
as
kill
well.
plants
And
too.
How so interesting.
but I love
So,
animals.
maybe that's why
I think it must be the animal thing
we
because
get
We
along so
love
well.
animals. Yeah.
because both is linguistic and naturalistic, and then
yeah, that was
you know.
my fourth one was also it was let's see, language was 3.86 and that was tied with spatial. And then 3.57 was my nature. And I thought that was really interesting. So
at the end of the scoring, it tells you what the other ones where you scored.
Yes.
So, funny thing, and I feel like all three of these belong together, and I'll explain why. So, my lowest score was body.
mine too.
Mine too.
I got a 2 on that one. And then math was 3.14, which is funny because that's pi.
Pie.
Yeah, I know. When you said that, I was like, "You got pie?"
Yes. And then right above that was musical.
Oh, wow.
3.43. And the reason why I say those go together is, to me, music is your math and your body coming together.
Oh yeah, that's true. Music is very mathy.
Tempo, beat, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
your body.
Yeah.
Literally playing an instrument or singing requires mastery of that part of your body.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I'll, as far as like singing goes, maybe I'm not very good at carrying a tune, but I do love to sing, but it's a linguistic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love to make up words to songs, and I love to scat.
But it's funny because you don't like the lyrics.
Yeah, and
To
songs.
when
I
you
really
listen
could
to
care
songs,
less
you can
about
care
the
less
lyrics.
about the lyrics. I love
And the reason why
lyrics
is
of
because
songs.
the lyrics don't apply to me. I'm like,
Mm.
they would be so much better if they would use this word, or if
Well,
it
I
was
do that
about
too.
this,
I
or-
used to always say that as a musician, I appreciated the music of a song, and as a writer, I appreciate the words.
Well,
of
and see,
a
Right,
I
song.
guess
right.
because I am a vocalist, first and foremost, as a musician, I am a vocalist. And so that's where the vocal melody and the lyrics were the most important thing to me about the song. So, and this was, it's kind of a weird thing. A lot of musicians can listen to a song and hear all of the different parts. And this is an ear training thing. I mean, if you've gone to music school, you learn how to do this. But a lot of even people that I know that are musicians who didn't go to school for music, they can pick apart, the bass line and the guitar line.
They can
and
hear all the
they can hear
instruments
all the parts
independently at the same
separately,
time.
like
Yeah.
all independently, all at the same time. When I hear music, I hear the vocal melody with lyrics, and I hear everything else as one.
Yeah.
I might hear like a cool little rhythm or a little little bass riff or whatever, but it's all together.
You're not picking
as
up
one.
on the
I
little
don't pick
ditties
up on
and
the
stuff. Yeah.
and I even sometimes have a hard time picking up on the harmonies because I just focus, my brain is focused on that vocal, the main vocal or whatever. And so I think that's kind of interesting too. So, but I really do the lyrics to songs, just light me up really. And I don't know, it's with the melody too though. So it's a combination of that linguistic and that,
And maybe that's because that your musical and your linguistic intelligence, they come together.
yes,
Mhm.
yes.
I can see that.
Yeah. And I do. That's the way I see it, I guess.
That's why I think it's cool, like to see the combinations and what they can create
and how they make something different in
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody is just one thing.
So my
Right.
last three were in this order from worst going up: body, math, which I said as I explained, I was kind of surprised that math was that low, and self, which I
Wow.
know, yeah, but I'm pretty good at deluding myself, so
Know
Like,
thyself.
self was on like my bottom three also. So
but the social, which is the interpersonal, was right there with nature. They were pretty close together.
Well, maybe
so.
that's why we're on this discovery of ourselves. Because I really
Yes.
feel like this podcast is really not about like
It's not about
me telling all of you people everything that I know, but me just discovering like, oh, I just realized this about
well, I
myself.
think that we
Today
learn
I
a
learned,
lot of
yes.
things
Yeah.
when we do this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Just from talking to each other, we learn a lot of things, and then we take these quizzes and we learn things.
and
like,
then we just kind of share what we're learning with
Yeah.
you listeners because
because
Yeah.
I mean, we're not the authority on
On
any of these
anything.
things that
Yeah.
we talk
Yeah,
about.
but clearly there are
But
some
these-
people who really have mastered
right.
self. Like
Yeah.
think
Well,
about like
think
a
of a
Buddhist
yogi.
monk. Yeah. Okay. We'll think of the same. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So a yogi, they both have the self and the
Yeah.
kinesthetic
I think of
aspect.
people who are motivational speakers
Oh,
because
yeah.
they understand themselves so well
Right.
that they can share it with other people. So they're like self and linguistic.
Maybe either that
Maybe
or
they're
just,
also learning at the same time,
yeah,
but
like,
they're
Right.
linguistic and
They're so high in
pedagogic
linguistic
so they
that
can
they can
share.
they can sell themselves because they're so linguistic. I mean, I want to say, and I'm pretty sure that motivational speakers do at some point you like know what they're talking about, but like I want to say that it's all about to get people to listen to you. It's all about the linguist. It's all about the sell. It's all about the
Yeah.
rhetoric.
That's
Mm,
that's why I said
Maybe.
like that
Like,
pedagogic.
It's
one.
all of the things that they
Well,
use
like
to
Kristen
speak
said,
to
the
people, all of the
pedagogic
tools.
They have the material.
they have the
Yeah.
material.
It's the
They
material.
they can
they're good at
naturally
teaching.
pull it out
But
of
I
the
mean,
air.
if you think of like a Oprah Winfrey or Brene Brown,
Mhm.
Brene Brown is on the lecture circuit and stuff. A lot of her stuff is on interpersonal. She's a social worker. That's her master's or whatever, or her PhD.
Well, I'm
is in
not
social
saying
work.
that they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just saying that a lot of it is like they're very rhetorical. They
Yeah.
know how to use rhetoric to
Oh,
get
yeah.
what they
Right,
want
that's what I'm
and
saying,
get
like-
people to believe what they
Right,
want them to
right.
believe.
They're strong in both of those.
Yeah.
'cause-
Yeah.
And
Well,
as a rhetoric teacher, I use rhetoric every day on my students. So
Well, and that that's the thing about the 7, 8, the 8
9, 10, 11.
intelligences, 9, 10, 11.
Well, I
yeah.
know. And there's
Multiples.
one that you didn't mention that I found online somewhere that I was really interested in. And then when I took the quiz, I was like, what the heck? That one wasn't even on there.
No, what is
Yeah.
it?
Critical evaluation.
so that
Oh.
would be
Yes.
like,
And I was like,
Critical
oh,
thinking.
I'm gonna score high on that.
that would be
one.
like the
Right.
11th intelligence.
Yeah. Well, and they
13th
are
floor.
still doing research. I mean, Gardner is still doing research. He didn't retire until 2019, and he is still alive and still doing research. And they are still adding to things. As they now, I will say that there are some criticism of it because both psychologists and educators sometimes argue that it's too broad and the intelligences simply represent talents, personality traits, and abilities, and that there's not enough empirical evidence in the research. So, but it's
Yeah, because who wants to risk only teaching a whole like set case study of students just in one
Right.
way? Like oh, we're going to teach you grades kindergarten through 12th grade only with music intelligence.
Well,
and
they're
who
not even
fails
talking about
and
that.
who succeeds.
What
then,
they're talking about is like testing. To get the proper empirical evidence, you would have to determine what their learning style is, and then gear the teaching to them.
And you would risk all of those who would fail at the education because that wasn't.
No, because what they would do is they would teach them based on what their intelligence is.
That would be only if it was actually true, though. But if it's not true based on that,
right.
then you risk. That's what I'm saying. You could risk.
Right.
And
so that's the reason, because they're not going to teach you only in one style, and there's not any evidence that teaching them according to the intelligence gives better educational outcomes. So
and the part that makes it tricky too is when you have let's just say there's 9 or 10 or 8,
right,
and you have a class of 30 kids, 32 kids. That's only how many head count per intelligence. So now you have how many different segments, or how you move on to another project or whatever in English, right? You may read 4 to 6 books and do modules, right? So if you're gonna do say you do 8 modules in a year, and then you have 8 different learning types, and there's only 4 kids in your class that learn with that learning style, then how many different projects do you have to create in all these different learning styles?
I think the theory there is that you could create learning styles that incorporate multiple different
but
things.
That's a lot of pressure
it's hard to
keep
it is.
It's hard to do that. We do try our best to differentiate and take into consideration individual learning. And then there's also, as far as things that hinder learning, English as a second language speakers, and special populations and everything like that. So it's really challenging, especially if you have less than an hour class time.
Oh yeah.
To be able to teach in so many different styles and differentiate in so many different ways when you have to hit all of these points on a daily lesson.
Right.
And then you have 8 classes a day.
Yeah. No, I get it.
It's definitely exhausting, to say the least.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying, I'm just wow, how do you, unless you could test the kids and have them enroll in a school, there's, obviously we've kind of gotten that way a little bit with magnet schools, where you have the math and science technology schools, and then you have the art schools.
And that's really nice too, because especially Dallas has specific, they have a law magnet school for kids that are interested in that. They have a culinary magnet school. They have schools that specialize that.
Stephen in Carrollton Farmers Branch, they also have those. They have a international business. They have
read a criminal law.
There's a criminal law one. There's a medical field. My son was in the METSA, which is math, engineering, technology, and science. There's also I'm trying to remember what it's called. It was a audiovisual journalism type.
Let's see, the
thing.
school that I teach
and,
at is
things like that.
Is a liberal arts
right.
school. So we are focused heavily on theater and art and music. So since it's a liberal arts school, theoretically, I suppose, that most of the students that attend there are interested in art and music, so they learn more visually and musically. If you are kinesthetic, we don't really have a sports team, so students that are kinesthetic would not come to our school because it is an art school.
Right. But they would probably be more likely be at like maybe one of the schools that has a good basketball team or a good football team, because that's where they would want to be. Yeah.
So you just mentioned something that made me think about, I was like, wow, there's not one that's culinary related at all. Nothing that has anything to do with like food or taste, sensory.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
That might be visual spatial, maybe. Or
But I mean, you know, there are those
logical.
types of
It could
people
fall
that
into naturalistic.
those people that can like
Oh, yeah.
it's not like see, but they like
They
have this sixth sense almost
About
of
what foods go together. Yeah,
yes.
and things. Yeah.
and they really understand like how to do the food. Like,
Right.
Sorry, I'm like lost at words because that's not
Well,
one
it's-
of my
it's
intelligences.
almost like
but,
the chemistry
Mhm,
of it.
mhm.
So maybe they're.
But it's
That might
also
be
very
logical, like I
body.
said.
It's also
It's all-
very body oriented
Right.
because the knife is like an extension of your hand in
well,
some
and
ways.
or the flavors are, you know, your tongue, your
Yes.
you know,
Outside of
they
your body.
understand they
Yeah.
understand what is visually appealing.
Mm-hmm.
They also understand what's going to taste good, how your body is going to react to. So
Smell.
yeah, smells. Yeah,
It's literally like all of the senses. Maybe not so much of hearing, but the other four senses.
Yeah. So it probably falls under multiple categories, maybe, unless they come up with, you know,
Yeah.
number 11Z or 12Z or something like that.
11Z lunch.
11Cs. Yes, that's it.
there we go.
11Cs. So I guess, you know, we've kind of covered that topic
Pretty thoroughly.
pretty thoroughly. Yeah, I think I'm really interested. I'd like to know if anybody else, any of our listeners have theories on it. Do you disagree? I know we have some psychology people who've.
Oh, yeah, psychologists and
Yeah, I would like to know what they think about it, because there's, you know, I would just be interested to know what they think about the intelligences, and I'd also like to know if anyone remembers it being 7 intelligences, because that's what I always remembered, and when I searched for it, I was not the only one.
like
searching.
in the 90s. I remember you talking about it in
7
the 90s.
intelligences.
Yeah.
It
So,
was.
and I would really like to hear, like, if there's a listener out there that is intrapersonal or interpersonal intelligence,
Yeah,
or if
obviously
you have
not one of
both,
us. Yeah.
you know, one or the other is your top and the
Right.
other one is your second. Because, like, I know, like, we're all, like, had linguist high and naturalist and music between the three
Visual,
of us.
spatial.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know people that are absolutely the logical, mathematical,
Right.
and musical. So I would be curious on the interpersonal, how that applies in your life and how you learn
Right.
with that skill.
Right.
Because I'm trying to understand, like,
Right.
how that applies to learning.
I would like to also, if anyone thinks they might be existential, because
Yes.
that
Yes.
that one is very
What test can I take to find out, like,
Right.
if there's a different test online?
if there's a different
I
test
bet
that
there.
kind of
I
does
bet
that
there's
one.
a different.
I kind of want to look
one.
now and
Gardner's 10 intelligences or whatever.
see. Uh-huh.
But yeah, I really am curious if anybody else has done anything about that or
Read any books on
read any
it or
books
anything?
on it.
Yeah.
And particularly that 7 intelligences. Look up the Mandela effect. Yeah. It's kind of creepy and weird.
And unrelated to the
And totally
Gardner's
unrelated to this
intelligences.
topic. Totally unrelated to this topic. So that's why I didn't go into it. Just look it up. I'm not lying. It's crazy. Okay. So next week, Amber's our hostess. And what are we talking about next week, Amber?
Next week we are talking about art. What is
Ooh.
art?
There goes my visual spatial thing right there.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be kind of cool. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with a talk about art. And you have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.